Hi, Jeff here. I've been working on this game called the Ziggurat, which is a little bit of a solo RPG crossed with a dungeon crawler for some time now, and I think it's at a particular point where it's quite a fun sort of playthrough. It's not ready yet, it's very much a prototype, but I thought it might be interesting to just show how it's started to come together, how the sort of framework is really kind of gelling now, and I'm really focused on balancing the game and creating all of the content that sits within that framework for a kind of consistent emergent narrative. So the game, the Ziggurat, is in essence, you take on the role of a storied hero, so somebody who's a kind of veteran, a legend, and in this particular instance I'm going with a chap called Vulcan, who's a kind of Viking blacksmith, I guess, who wields a great hammer and hammers things. The quest that we're going on is a rescue mission to rescue the Princess of Arn, who's been captured by these kind of mad cultists and will be sacrificed shortly. So the basic game is always a similar kind of premise. You choose a hero, and there'll be a range of different heroes. At the moment, I've got a couple that'll be part of the print and play demo. You can play Vulcan, or you can play Vixen, who's a kind of a huntress. But in the final game, there'll be a whole range of different types of hero that you can play. And at the moment, the two are a little bit on the kind of fighter, roguish kind of archetype, perhaps because it allows me to sort of set aside a lot of the magic rules and make it a little bit simpler in the initial sort of play tests. And there'll also be a range of different adventures that you can go through. So the adventures won't be in a sort of campaign-like or sequential. They're episodic, and you kind of play that 60 to 90 minute game, and then you kind of one and done. You can play the same quest over and over again with different heroes, even with the same hero. The actual playthrough is very, very different depending on the circumstances and encounters that come out for that particular quest. But the quests themselves are a sort of four-part act that's a guided kind of story through the emergent narrative that comes from all of the kind of random encounters and denizens and maps that you meet as you go. And we'll have a look at this. Let's have a look at this in more detail, I think. So the first thing you do is read the intro, so a basic sort of rescue mission in this particular instance, and then turn over. The first page, or the first side of each individual quest, has a whole heap of sort of setup instructions. Principally, you set up the map stack, which are all of the individual tiles that we'll be encountering in the Ziggurat. And there's quite a few of those. You sort of randomize them and have a couple of key tiles that marry up with the key acts of the quest. We have to set aside a few cards in this particular quest. So we've got these 3 cards that we're setting aside. So the kind of mini boss and a couple of extra special characters that we might meet specifically for this particular quest. I'll just set those aside for now. And then we have the threat deck. So the threat deck is really the kind of way in which the Ziggurat or the dungeon pushes back against the party. And this kind of outlines what goes on in the dungeon or the world around you, independent of your own sort of actions. And in this case, it describes the threat. So here we are sort of walking unmolested amongst the throngs of joyful cultists. We're in effect in disguise, walking amongst the cultists as we kind of infiltrate their temple and attempt to mount a rescue. So we'll turn that over and have a quick look at the underlying threat that we have at the moment in the quest. So actually everything's quite good for us here. It says we're all friends here. We get a +2 modifier for any sort of peaceful interaction that we have with the cultists. And we can also kind of avoid combat with the individual cultists if we know the right sort of rituals for genuflecting effectively in front of our superiors in order to avoid some kind of confrontation. And that all reflects the fact that we are in disguise. So the threat level, the threat deck always has this loot level, which indicates how much loot will be given out for each specific encounter that we have, and that is by extension a kind of factor of how difficult the specific encounter or how difficult the monsters and enemies will be in the system. So the lower we go into the Ziggurat, or the longer we take on the quest, the more and more dangerous this becomes. The bottom right hand corner on every one of these threat cards has a specific threat escalation, and so we process that at the end of each round to determine whether or not the threat has become worse. So I'll put that to the side and you'll see how that mechanism works as we go through a few turns. So in addition to the quest deck and the threat deck, we also have the peril deck, and the peril deck are a series of encounters that are specific to this particular quest that happen at the end of each individual round. And they're really quite varied. There'll be people you meet, changes in the layout of the dungeon, and so on. So let's just continue on with the setup. The hero setup, it says we start with 2 equipment cards and 1 item card. So equipment cards are just loot cards. So this is the loot deck over here. You see this sort of interesting cover. We have 2 cards for equipment, and that represents a sort of abstract supply resource that we can use for a whole variety of different things. And we also have 1 individual loot item. In this case, we've drawn the caged cricket. He's a friendly little character, but utterly useless. So I'm not sure how much help he's going to be in the quest, but let's just say that Vulcan has a pet cricket he likes to take on missions with him. So he's got a couple of skills, or he's got a skill for Berserker, and we'll talk about that when it comes relevant. He's wearing cloth armor, so just sort of standard adventuring clothes. And really all this does is define what his type of defense is. So he rolls Shadow for defense. And his weapon is a melee weapon that uses muscle. And it's a large hammer, which he uses to sort of pound on things. And then last but not least, we have the next steps. So it says, the cultists hold the chosen in a prison prior to meeting Thoth's benevolence. Locate the monastic cells to progress. So we're looking for the prison cells. Hopefully that'll be the location of the princess that we can then rescue. So we're going to start out life here in the plaza, in the jungle, entering the citadel of the cultists. One last thing is just a couple of sort of housekeeping elements. We've got a HP tracker, so we're at maximum hit points at the moment. And your hit points, they're sort of physical, sort of mental, they're kind of your will to keep going. Then you have a grit track. The grit track is your current determination level, and you'll see how this works. But in essence, the grit track is a dice optimization mechanism that we can use to sort of re-roll dice, or effectively reset the dice in certain scenarios. And we'll see how that works as we go through. Right, okay, I think we're ready to start. So we're in the plaza. The very first thing we do is have a look at the turn phases. So the game loop is the same every time, and every turn you have 4 different phases that you go through. We move, we explore, we optionally rest, and last but not least is the peril phase, or the kind of phase for the Ziggurat itself. So the first thing we need to do is move. We've got anywhere to move, so we're going to move 0, which is a perfectly valid movement. And at the end of your movement, if you are in a location that has an unexplored doorway on the location, then you can draw, reveal, and place a new map tile. So in this case, we've picked up the Fallen Gate. So these are just prototype images with a kind of green background to give you a sense that we're in the jungle. But the doors are the most important thing here. And what we need to do is connect the doors to each other. You can't connect them with one single side. You always have to have a minimum of 2 sides touching. So, that's perfectly legitimate That's legitimate. It's got 3 sides there. Let's do that. We'll have that. And so when we've done that, we place a little token on there to say that it's unexplored. So we move into the explore phase. And if you want, you can move to anywhere you like within the dungeon. There's only 2 tiles revealed, so we haven't really got very far that we can go. Or alternatively, if you're adjacent to an unexplored tile, you can move into that tile and explore. So the first thing we do is check to see if the tile that we've arrived on, 13, the Fallen Gate in this instance, marries up with the tile that we're looking for in the quest. In this case, it doesn't. We've probably got quite far to go before we find that. And so we come to the encounter deck, and there's a whole range of encounters by map tile. And we pull the first encounter from that deck and see what is in that particular location. So the Fallen Gate, I'll quickly read through that. So it says here, an ancient statue emerges from the jungle foliage. The construct stands guard over a fallen portal, the great stone arcs strewn at its feet. As you approach, the great golem moves to assume a more threatening posture. You will not be able to pass through without facing it. And so this is a standard kind of encounter format. It has a description of the sort of scenario that you find yourself in, and then on the other side there's a series of instructions that you follow. So in this instance it says, you shall not pass, place a barrier on all unexplored doorways. So there's 2 unexplored doorways here. So he is guarding those doorways. And in essence it says we're going to have to fight and destroy that golem in order to be able to pass through these barriers. But he doesn't seem to be all that interested in. He says otherwise the golem remains quite uninterested in your antics. So if we don't want to pass through these doors, he doesn't really care too much about us. So it's pretty early in the game. Golems are quite difficult, and so I think we probably look to see if we can find an alternate way around. Now, interestingly enough, there's also an option here that says an unlikely ally. And on this side, it simply says that if you find yourself fighting enemies in this particular location, you might be able to trick them into fighting the golem, or at least have the golem fight on your side as a companion for just that combat. So we're going to leave that there. It's got this little icon, which means it's a place of interest. And we'll leave our icon there on the map to say that there's something going on in this map location still. And we'll move on to the rest phase. So we haven't got anything to do in the rest phase at the moment. We're fully healed. There's no real benefit to resting at the moment. So we're going to do what's called press on, which means you bypass the rest phase and go straight through to the peril phase, which is good. It means we don't get any peril on the threat. We're just sort of rushing through the dungeon. But we do have to draw a peril card. Okay, what does it say? A patrol. You stumble upon a patrol and must sneak past the denizens or raise the alarm. Okay, so it's a patrol. The first thing we need to do is draw a card from the current faction deck. So it's all cultists all the way. It's cultists, a mile deep of cultists in this particular adventure. We don't reveal the cultist, we leave it face down, and we continue to follow the instructions. So it says check shadow, so that's a kind of a shadow check. We'll do that. And we've got a critical hit, which is very good. Every time there's a critical hit, you always get a benefit. And the same is true if there's a critical miss. You always encounter some kind of problem on a critical miss. So critical hit, we gain the initiative. We already have the initiative. We can refresh an exhausted party member, or we can gain 2 grit. So we get 2 grit. And again, we'll talk about grit a little bit later. And we are successful. So being successful, it says, place them on the peril track. So these guys are still hunting us down. The patrol has kind of picked up our scent, as it were. But they, and I'm using these purple and grey tokens for this, they are quite far behind us. So every single token sort of represents how far they are behind us in their pursuit. And this becomes what's called the peril track. Now, interestingly, if these tokens get to 0, so there are no tokens, then we'll be overrun and we'll have to face this patrol. However, if we can get this to a high enough number, if it's 6 or higher at the end of the round, then we'll have lost them and they'll give up the pursuit and believing we've kind of moved on. So there's 4 of those. We'd have to get 2 more peril there in order to be successful. All right, that's it. That's the first encounter from the peril track, and unfortunately we've already got them sniffing around. They're onto us. All right, so now we get to move. So we can't move through these barriers. I'm going to move back to the plaza and scout. Okay, what have we got? The secluded glade, number 12. It's really only the doors and the number that are important at this stage. So the same types of doors, so we've got an interesting addition here. We've got a secret door. You can see that sort of slightly different door icon, secret door. So we can't connect the secret door to the other door. We need to connect those doors. That's a nice legal connection. And we'll move into the secluded glade. So, secluded glade. What have we got? Deep in the heart of the jungle, a secluded glade lies hidden. All right, so we've come to the secluded glade. It's another one of these. It's got a nice description of what we find, but notice at the very bottom of this encounter, there's this peril statement. And all the peril means is you have to resolve this particular question first before you turn over the card. And normally it means that there's a kind of binary choice on the other side of the card that you may need to make now before you actually see what the details of that choice are. In this case, it's just rolling a shadow test, which is some kind of agility test. And it says, that ain't good. So we've got +1 for shadow because of our attribute, so that's really a 3, but both of those are over the target value. So that is a miss, straight miss, all bad. So we miss, so we automatically upgrade our grit track. Every time you miss, you add +1 to your grit. Let's turn over and see what horror befalls us. Okay, failure. The Maboon Spike Trap. You have fallen into a pit and your party takes 2 hit points of splash damage. So every member of the party takes 2 hit points of damage. There's only me in the party, so we take 2 hit points of damage. And the spikes are poisoned. Test muscle, and on a miss, you're poisoned. So let's have a look. Okay, so we get a 4, 3, and 5. So we get +2 for muscle, because we are pretty tough when it comes to things. So that's a 6. Both of those are underneath, so that's a strong hit. And your constitution prevails. And so we are resisting the poison. Last but not least, you find some useful equipment amongst the corpses. Draw 2 loot and move to memories. So that goes into a kind of generic discard pile for memories. And memories, kind of your recent lived experience, and you can use those for a variety of different things. It's like a special resource, mainly for enchantment. So if you're going to enchant your weapon with a true name, some forbidden knowledge, you would use your recent memories for that. So we don't have any forbidden knowledge at the moment, but we do get to draw 2 loot cards. 2 loot cards. So the interesting thing about loot cards, whenever you draw loot, they always are drawn face down, and that means they're generic equipment. So you can hold as much generic equipment as 3 plus whatever your muscle value is. So we can hold up to 5 of these equipment items, and you can use those for kind of abstract resource tasks, like you might need it as a piece of rope, or you might want to equip one of your companions with a shield, or whatever it might be. Alternatively, you can actually flip the card over and reveal the item that it is. And the whole concept of that is that you have all of this loot sitting in your backpack, this equipment sitting in your backpack that's relatively useful. you can rummage around in that backpack, and when you do and discover something specific, then you can't change that item. So now that we have rummaged in the backpack, we've discovered Sifu's Bottled Tempest, which is a kind of like a storm in a bottle or a lightning in a bottle, which is pretty cool. It's kind of can be used as an attack on monsters, so that goes in our revealed item area. And you can only have as many items as 2 plus your shadow, and I'll keep that as a generic equipment abstract. Now you can always rummage in your backpack in the rest phase. So when it's the rest phase, if you've run out of items or you just like to see what items might be in here, you can certainly do that during the rest phase. I'm going to keep these as the kind of equipment cards because I can always turn them to items later, and I might find an alternate use for those cards in the rest phase. Okay, so that's the end of my turn. I could heal. I've lost a couple of hit points, but I'm not going to. I'm going to press on. I'm going to keep going. And so we bypass this, time doesn't pass. We don't have to put any peril tokens on our threat deck yet. And we get to reveal a new peril card. So let's see what this has to say. Nothing happens. Your rest is surprisingly uneventful. Perfect. Okay. So we move on to the beginning of the next round, and we'll stay where we are. So we'll move 0 and we will explore. What have we got? That is the Temple Ruins. Okay, and interestingly enough, there is another secret door here for us to go through. That's exactly what I was hoping for. And we'll pass through this particular secret door. Now, when you do pass through a secret door, this is again one of these player aids for the encounter phase, you get a bunch of different benefits the first time that you discover and pass through a secret door. We'll go through into the Temple Ruins. So the first benefit is that we can add 3 peril tokens to the peril track. So remember, we've got these cultists that are sort of hunting us down like dogs on the peril track. We can add 3 tokens to that as we kind of go through the secret door, if you like, and give them the slip. So we move out of the secluded glade through a secret door into the Temple Ruins. We also gain the upper hand, but we already have the initiative, and we gain 2 grit. So up to 7 grit. It can only go as high as 8. Any higher than that, and it's just wasted. Okay, so far so good, and we're going to have a look at the Temple Ruins number 11. Okay. What have we got here? Okay, Temple Ruins. It says, a ruined temple on the outskirts of the Ziggurat. Broken steps descend into a cave mouth beneath the foundations. The way is lit by shafts of sunlight beaming through the ruined stone canopy and a faint glow of fungal phosphorescence. Something fetid and long-lived emerges from the dark recesses of the chamber. That does not sound good. So, the very first instruction we have here is an unnaturally long-lived. Spawn a jungle beast and add the keywords undead and enter the fray. So, let's go through that step by step. So always when you're asked to spawn a denizen of the Ziggurat, it'll have this command spawn, and it'll nominate the specific faction deck that you're going to take that creature from. So in this case, the jungle deck. And it's asking for a beast keyword. And so what we look at is the very top of the deck to see whether or not there's a keyword for beast. So in this case, we've got the keyword beast, and so that would be an appropriate card to pull from the jungle. Now, we can attach the keyword undead. We'll do that in a moment. There's some weapons and abilities and things that you have that are specific to the undead in the Ziggurat. And so it's simply saying that in this particular instance, this guy will be undead. Oh, a giant serpent. All right, very good. So the other thing it says is enter the fray. So that all that simply means is you cannot do any peaceful negotiations with this denizen. You have to enter combat straight away. So in this case, we're facing up against a giant jungle serpent. A giant snake slithers into view. He's actually quite a powerful little creature, which isn't great for us, but we're going to give it a go. We're going to give it a crack. So the first thing you do when you go into combat is you determine how strong that creature is. So we look at the threat level. So we're on level 1 only, and we check the loot level in the top right hand corner of the card, and it says there that all denizens have a loot level of 2 only. So that means we take the top of the loot deck, we draw 2 cards. Yep. And then we look at the icons on those loot cards. So I've got a star and I've got a sun, and I map those to the icon on the bottom of the denizen card, which is a little sunburst. And that's how much loot that particular guy has. So we discard any excess loot. So he's got 1 loot card, no problem. Why is the loot important? Well, it's important as you go deeper into the dungeon, because the more loot that a particular denizen has, powers and abilities that he has are determined by sometimes how much equipment he has attached to his particular card. So if you look carefully at the giant serpent again, at the bottom it's got power, poison, bite, but it's also got 2 additional powers: equip 2, constrict, equip 3, strangle. So if he had 2 equipment items, then he would do constriction, which is a lot worse than just his poisonous bite. So we're pretty lucky. We're meeting him early in the game, and we may well be able to have victory here. So let's go into combat. So there's no additional rules from the encounter around combat. We're just going to fight this guy directly. So when you enter combat, the first thing that you do is check your initiative and see whether or not you're going to attack first or defend first. So we have the initiative. We're going to do a straight up attack. We roll the dice. We look at target die, which is a 3 plus 2 for muscle. That's 5. And we see if there's any die that are underneath that target die. So there is a 4 there, which is underneath the target die. So we do, in our attack, 4 points of damage, minus any armor that he might have. So he has no armor. Sorry, I should have recorded that we are in the first round. He has no armor. So we do 4 points of damage, and he gets reduced to 4 hit points. Like so. I'll just use that little dice to track his hit points. So it's the monster's turn to attack. Now, when he attacks, he's going to use his power straight away, and he has a power of poison bite, which adds blight 2 and poison, and he attacks for 4. So all we can really do is defend against that, and we defend using our shadow. We have a 4 plus 1 for shadow, so that means that fails, but we get 4 in defense. So we defend for 4, so he doesn't do any damage to us at the moment, but unfortunately he does do 2 points of kind of like a venom attack, and also he poisons us, which is a sort of long-standing condition. So it's like at the end of every turn we're going to take damage until we get rid of that poison, and the neurotoxin, that kind of venom, is going to hit us just during combat. Alright, so that's the end of the first round, which is pretty, and there's not much else I can do as a hero at the moment, because all I have is a basic attack. I don't have any enchantments, I don't have any companions. I could use one of my items. The only item I could use is Seafood's Bottled Tempest, and while that's pretty cool, it stuns and does damage to people, it's really comes into its own as a kind of group attack. It sort of attacks everything that's in the encounter area. Because we're only fighting this one serpent, we haven't received any damage yet. I think we might be okay. So we're going to attack for again. What have we got? So 3. That's a 5. It's still not enough. We do 2 points of damage. So he goes down to 2. It's round 2. He attacks. He doesn't have any particular powers. He can just do an attack of 4 and 4 only. And so we need to defend. All right, so oh, that's very nice. We have a critical hit on our defense. So if you do a critical hit in defense, it's just the same as before. You gain the initiative, or you refresh an exhausted character. We don't have any exhausted. Or we gain 2 grit, which isn't great because we've already maxed out our grit. And we have managed to defend for 3, 3, 6, so he doesn't do any damage to us. We do take 2 damage from the venom, and that goes down to 1. And that poison is just a permanent poison for the past. And we go into round 3. So at the end of round 3, he will refresh. So we're attacking. Okay, so we've done an attack for another 3 points of damage. He's dead. Perfect. So we managed to kill him by round 3. The only thing that's wrong with us is we're poisoned. We have to get rid of poison. We did take 2 points of damage, but I think we did pretty well in that instance. So we managed to kill him. We'll put him in our memories, and we've gained some loot. So the question is, do we look at the loot, or do we use it as equipment? I think I'm going to look at the loot. What is it? A scroll of arcane enigmas. Aha. So that's a chance for us to discover some forbidden knowledge, which could be very good, because we might want to try and enchant our weapon at some point. All right, all well and good. Let me have a quick look at the rest of the temple ruins. So there is another section on there called Pet Cemetery. So at rest, you may raise from the dead a bestial denizen from your memories as a companion. Check Law 5. If you miss, time passes. You may try again. If you succeed, time passes, but you lose 1 maximum HP and your new companion rises. Okay, so this is a beast. I guess the question is, do we want to have a giant undead serpent at our behest and call for as a companion, as a pet? I think Vulcan, in his infinite wisdom, would like to have a giant pet undead serpent. So we're certainly going to try that. We're going to try and raise the giant serpent from the dead. So in order to do that, we need to rest. So we're going to do our first rest phase. And let's have a quick look at the rest phase. So we can do a thing called catch your breath. So the very first thing that happens when you catch your breath is time passes. So one of these tokens gets taken off each and every member of the peril track. And we also add a token to the threat deck. So this first token goes there. So there's 6 tokens here, 1 token here, and we're going to attempt to raise the dead. Every time we do that, every time we go to raise this particular guy, time will pass and these guys are going to catch up to us. We could close out. That's what I'm going to do. So I will close out this particular round and we'll look to camp the following day and attempt to raise the dead because we'll have a better chance if we camp. Let's do that. So we're going to camp. So we're going to rest. We won't do this. We still get to heal. So I'm going to attempt to heal. I can either heal hit points or try and remove the poison. I'm going to try and remove the poison. That's successful. Very nice. A strong hit. So we managed to cure the poison. We don't have any rest actions. Oh, sorry. We do have a rest action we'd like to perform. So we're going to do Scroll of the Arcane Enigma. And it says, at rest, test law. On a strong hit, draw true name, or on a miss, you don't. So we don't have any bonus for law. Ooh, that's horrible. That's truly terrible. So that's a straight up miss, and if we let that stand, then we're going to just basically be staring at this arcane enigma scroll and learn nothing from it. But I think we might have a breakthrough here. So we can burn grit. So all that means is you can use this kind of dice mitigation mechanism where you can actually reset your grit level and take that value, which is an 8, as your target value. So we would change that to an 8, and that would become a strong hit, and that gets reduced back down to our reset level of 2, which is the perfect time to use something like all of our momentum that we've gained from the grit track. So we get to draw 2 true names and choose one. So these true names are like the true names of demons, elementals, and archons. And if you know the true name of a creature, then you have dominion and power over it. And you can go through a kind of binding ritual to bind them to your weapon as an enchantment for the duration of the adventure. So what have we got here? We've got Ezek and Hora. So Hora gives us a kind of weaken attribute, which allows us to weaken with resolve, or crippling fear. Alternatively, we can use like an earth elemental, which gives us a kind of stone skin armor or rock flesh. I think, given we have just cloth armor, that I like the idea of the earth elemental binding his will. So we might do that. We'll take the earth elemental, and that true name just goes into our inventory. And you can have as many true names, you can have 2 true names plus 1 per point of lore that you have. So we've got 0 lore, so we can have up to 2 true names in our inventory if we want to, that aren't bound to an existing weapon. All right, so that's the end of the rest phase. Now we've got to process this area here. So we look at the peril track, and if anything has 6 or more tokens on it, we manage to lose them and they no longer know where we are. So we put that at the back of our faction deck. We don't know who he was. We cast those out and we draw a peril card for the end of the round. So in the temple ruins, the clockwork merchants, we fall in with a party of artificers and tinkerers come to trade gears and mechanisms for the cultists' freakish fleshworks. So the next step is we're going to spawn a cultist. We have to spawn a cultist. We pull the cultist faction deck, and it says spawn a cultist humanoid. So you'll see on the front of that it's a clockwork giant. It's not a humanoid. So we take the card off the top, put it on the bottom, and we check the next card, and that is a humanoid. All well and good. Okay, so then we turn the card over and we check to see if there are any sort of parlay options for us here. And it says you can parlay with this character, you can trade a curio, or if you have a potion, you could try and recruit him as a member of the party. Now, at this point, we can have a look and rummage around in our backpack to see if we have any additional items that might be of interest. We do have a couple of curios, no potions though. So we could trade with him, or we could have a look inside our backpack to see if there's anything in there that he might find interesting. I don't want to give up the Sifu's Bottle Tempest. I could give him the Caged Cricket, but he's a friendly little fellow. I don't really want to give him up. All right, I will have a look in the backpack, and we find the Dust of the Celestial Comet, which is also a curio. That's a kind of group stun though. That's quite nice too. All right, just for the sake of argument, I will attempt to trade with this particular erudite apostle. Now the cool thing is we do have a bonus from the threat level because they still think that we're cultists. And so I get a +2 modifier to trade. So I think we'll give it a go. Do a trade. Why not? You can see how that works. So there's a nice little player aid that shows you when you're dealing with denizens what your options are. So trade, we just do a check against presence and see whether or not we're successful. So we have to give up and discard this card straight away, and then we get to roll a presence check. Oh! That's a straight up miss, but 1, remember I said 1 is particularly odd in that you can almost always beat a 1 by burning grit. Our grit's at 2, so we can burn grit back to 2 to get a 2. And so make that a weak hit, And on a weak hit, when you're trading, you get to draw 1, keep 1. So we can just draw a new item. And I'll just put it back into my equipment. I won't even look at it. But the cool thing about having been successful at trading, oh, I didn't even need to do that actually. Sorry, we get +2 on our modifier for that. So we would have had 1 + 2 is a 3, which is a weak hit. So we're all good. I don't have to burn grit. All right, so we trade with him, we get the loot item, and then because we had a friendly trade, he goes on his way without any further ado or conflict. Now, the other thing it says, when we meet these clockwork merchants and we learn about the way in which they kind of use clockwork gears and mechanisms in the fleshworks to create these golems, it asks us to add the muscle mechanic to the peril deck. So in our set aside cards, one of these is the muscle mechanic. So it's the muscle mechanic. And he gets shuffled into the peril deck. So I'm just going to put him into the peril deck. Give that, a bit of a shuffle. Let's see how we go. Let's just cut that. And that's the end of the peril phase. All right, so that stays there. We can still resurrect pets in the pet cemetery if we find any pets. We do have a pet, remember. We've got a pet snake. It's something we might try next. But I think that's where I might call it quits just for today. And let me know what you think. That's how it plays. I think we got a chance to see many of the different aspects of the game, different types of encounter, you know, a battle, some kind of parlaying option, how the kind of tableau of your hero's party develops over time, and some of the mechanisms around the peril track. Anyway, hopefully that was a bit of fun, and I'll see you next time. Bye.